I wasn't even angry at first. Just quiet, numb, like someone had turned down the volume on my life. It was late on a Thursday night when it happened. The kind of late that makes everything feel hazy, like you're floating just outside your own body. I had just wrapped up a client meeting over Zoom, my third of the evening, and I was finally sinking into the soft leather armchair in the den when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look at it. God knows, I wanted one moment, just 1 minute, to be mine. But I glanced down and there it was. A push notification. Instagram. My cousin Mallory had posted a new story. I wasn't expecting much. Probably another photo of her overpriced matcha latte or a blurry shot of the family dog in one of his ridiculous Christmas sweaters. But when I tapped the story open, I wasn't prepared. It was a boomerang video first. A champagne flute clinking against another. Glittering dresses, sharp tuxedos. Then a second story, this one panned across the tarmac. A private jet. One of those shiny, insultingly smug jets that practically screams we're above it all, literally and figuratively. Then came the third story. And this one stung. My father, Robert, was in the frame. Laughing, a glass of whiskey in hand. My mother, Martha, elegantly perched on a plush cream leather seat, her diamond earrings catching the light like a dare. Beside her, Jennifer, my younger sister, grinning as if nothing in the world could ever touch her. And surrounding them were my other siblings. All of them. Every single one. Even Alan, who never shows up for anything unless there's free food or family drama. They were all there. I wasn't. Not even a text. Not a call. Nothing. Just filtered frames and hashtag joy beaming from my screen like a lighthouse made for someone else's storm. I sat there, staring, watching that 15-second story replay again and again until it looped into numbness. There was no misunderstanding. I checked the date. They had left this morning, which meant the planning had happened long before. The silence wasn't accidental. It was chosen. I should have known. I should have seen it coming. But there's something about family that makes you keep hoping, even when you know better. The next morning, I didn't go into the office. I didn't log on. I didn't answer emails or calls. I drove straight to my father's house, not even thinking about what I'd say. When I knocked, he opened the door like nothing was wrong. Like I hadn't just seen an entire timeline of laughter I was never invited to. "Caroline," he said, adjusting his robe, "this is early for you." I stepped into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. That house still smelled like pine cleaner and entitlement. Nothing had changed. Not since I was 15, and they grounded me for asking why Jennifer never had to do chores. "I saw Mallory's story," I said. My voice didn't tremble. I was proud of that. He looked confused for half a second, then something hard slid into place behind his eyes. "Oh," he said simply. That? I repeated. "You didn't even tell me." He didn't move. Just folded his arms and looked at me like I was a billing error. "They didn't want you there," he said finally. No anger. No apology. Just cold, clean math. Like he was reading a spreadsheet instead of breaking my ribs with words. I stared at him, the silence between us stretching and tightening. I thought maybe he'd soften. Maybe he'd realize what he was saying. But then he added something that split me open in a new way. "I send you $10,000 a month. And this is how you treat me." The air in the room evaporated. I wasn't even sure what part hurt more, the words or the way he said them. Like the money was a leash. Like love had a price tag and mine had been paid in full. I turned slowly, walked back out to the car, and didn't cry. Not right then. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. But as I drove down the long driveway, passing the gates they'd had custom-made with the family initials, I realized something unsettling. My presence had become optional. My love, a transaction. They didn't need me. Just my wire transfers. By the time I got home, the sun was hitting the living room in that honey-colored way it always does in late autumn. It should have felt comforting. But all it did was light up the space like a stage where I'd been playing the wrong part for years. I curled into the couch with a mug of tea that went cold too fast and scrolled back through the story highlights. Every frame of photo album I wasn't in. Later that night, I called Thomas. My husband answered on the third ring, his voice soft but distracted. "Hey, babe," he said. "What's up?" "They went without me," I said. "To Hawaii. The vacation. Everyone's there. I wasn't invited." There was a pause. And then the kind of sigh you give when you know something but hoped it wouldn't come out. "Oh, Caroline. You knew." Another pause. Longer this time. Enough to say everything he didn't. "They didn't want drama," he said eventually. "Your dad thought it would be better this way. Jennifer said you've been tense lately and it might upset the group." Tense. I choked on the word. "I pay for her therapy sessions." Did she mention that part? "Caroline, please," Thomas said, sounding more tired than apologetic. "You told me they were planning something," I said, my voice shaking now. "You said we'd go as a family." He didn't respond. "I need to ask you something," I said. "And I need you to answer it honestly." "Okay. Did you know I wasn't invited?" There was silence. And then the sound of breath catching. "I suspected," he said finally. Not a denial. Not even regret. Just resignation. I hung up. The next few days passed like ice water, numb and slow. I went to work. I led meetings. I smiled at interns and signed contracts and answered emails with a precision that almost made it look like I wasn't unraveling underneath. But at night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the photo on the fridge of all of us from last Christmas. Everyone's smiling. Even me. I stared at that version of myself, trying to remember what she thought was real. And then I started writing. Not a journal. Not a diary. Just notes. Names. Dates. Expenses. Patterns. The emotional receipts of a daughter turned donor. Because if love had become transactional, maybe it was time I started keeping records too. By the fourth day, I had stopped crying. Not because the pain had lessened or the hurt had somehow resolved itself in my chest, but because something more enduring had taken its place. A quiet steeliness. A calm, unrelenting resolve. It didn't come with fanfare or anger. It came like a tide, steady, persistent, impossible to ignore. I stopped crying not because I didn't care, but because I had finally decided to care differently. To care selectively. Strategically. You don't grow up in a family like mine without learning how to endure. But I had made a mistake somewhere along the way. I had mistaken endurance for loyalty and self-sacrifice for love. I had thought that if I gave enough money, time, effort, silence, they would one day look at me and say, "There she is. Our daughter. Our sister. Our anchor." Instead, they had boarded a plane to paradise and left me behind like an unpaid intern they forgot to fire. So I stopped waiting. For a call. For an apology. For a breadcrumb of guilt. I stopped sitting by my phone hoping someone would acknowledge the hurt they caused. Instead, I opened my laptop and started pulling strings. Not out of malice. Not out of spite. But with the clear-eyed certainty of a woman who had been used for long enough. Jennifer's tuition, the private university fund I had deposited into for the last year and a half, gone. I closed the account that afternoon. Not only closed it, but redirected the funds into a savings account with my name and mine alone on the login credentials. The email confirmation hit my inbox with a satisfying little ping. I didn't smile, but I did take a breath that reached all the way into my ribs. My younger brother Alan's car lease, the one under my name because his credit was a war zone, canceled. I waited until I knew he'd be sleeping off his Friday night whiskey bender before I called the dealership. They gave me the usual pushback, termination fees, paperwork, but I didn't waver. "It's stolen," I said, calm as still water. "The driver is unauthorized, and the car is registered under my name." Within hours, they'd towed it from the curb of his girlfriend's apartment in Brooklyn. I didn't check his Instagram story, but I heard the meltdown made it onto his feed before he deleted it. My parents' monthly stipend, the one I had quietly deposited into their joint account for the past 6 years without fail, paused. No explanation. No warning. No message. I simply logged into the bank's backend, flipped a few digital switches, and watched the auto transfer go from scheduled to archived. The silence that followed wasn't just a lack of noise, it was a kind of hollow quiet that echoed in places I hadn't known were empty until then. And then I did something more symbolic than strategic. I unfollowed them all. One by one. Not just from social media, but from my mind. From that emotional waiting room I had built inside myself where I sat, always hoping to be called in, finally noticed, finally loved right. I unsubscribed from the endless newsletter of their needs. I deleted calendar reminders for birthdays, anniversaries, dental appointments I used to pay for quietly. I blocked the urge to reach out when I remembered someone's allergy prescription was due for a refill. And then I did the thing that felt most radical, most foreign, most dangerous. I invested in myself. I booked therapy sessions with a woman named Simone, a soft-spoken but razor-sharp psychologist who lived 2 blocks from my apartment and specialized in family enmeshment. I didn't even know the term until she used it in our first session. "You were trained," she said, "to measure your worth in output. In caretaking. You became the scaffolding for people who never asked how heavy it was to hold them up." Her voice was calm. Her words were a scalpel. I didn't argue. I booked a solo trip to Lisbon 2 weeks later. I didn't check anyone's calendar. I didn't run it by Thomas, who had been sleeping on the couch for the last 3 nights after I told him I needed space. I just did it. Bought the ticket, reserved a quiet little apartment overlooking the water. And when I clicked confirm on the booking page, something in me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. The night before I left, Thomas knocked on the door of the guest room I had claimed as my own. He stood in the doorway, rumpled and sheepish, holding a mug of tea I hadn't asked for. "I know I should have told you," he said. I didn't answer. I thought they'd come around. I didn't think it would go this far. I looked at him then. At the man I had built a life with. At the man who had let silence stretch like a bridge I was always expected to walk alone. "They didn't go too far," I said, my voice steady. "They went exactly as far as they knew I would allow." He looked down, then back up. "Are you coming back?" "I'm not sure," I said. And I meant it. Lisbon was warm in a way I hadn't known I needed. The city hummed with a rhythm I didn't have to match. I walked the cobbled streets in sandals that pinched slightly and let the sun tattoo its presence onto my shoulders. I sat in cafes with chip tables and ordered pastries I couldn't pronounce without apology. I watched people kiss openly, argue theatrically, live messily, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't take pictures. I didn't post anything. I didn't tell anyone where I was. I let myself be no one for a while. And in that anonymity, I found something I hadn't expected. I found myself. Not the daughter. Not the sister. Not the monthly deposit or the emergency contact or the unpaid therapist. Just me. I stayed for 2 weeks. 2 clean, bright weeks. And when I came back, I didn't pick up where I left off. I started over. The letter from my mother arrived a month later. No return address. Just her neat handwriting on a cream envelope that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I knew what it was before I opened it. I could feel it in the paper, thick and expensive, the kind she saved for moments she wanted to feel ceremonial. There was no apology. Of course there wasn't. Just a list. Cable bill. Mortgage shortfall. Medication costs. HOA fees. An itemized breakdown of the ways she assumed I would continue to fund the life they had chosen to live without me. At the bottom, in her looping cursive, she had written, "I trust you'll do the right thing. Family comes first." I read it once, then again, then a third time, and then I set it down gently on the kitchen table. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't tear it up like some theatrical protagonist in a Netflix drama. I simply didn't respond. Because here's the thing they never understood. Silence cuts both ways. And mine, at long last, had become deliberate. 2 weeks after that, Jennifer tried to call. I let it ring. She texted afterward, "Call me when you're ready to talk." Things got complicated. "We miss you." I didn't reply. Alan posted something cryptic on his story, some half-baked quote about betrayal and blood ties, and tagged me in a way only he could think was subtle. I muted him. Permanently. Thomas called, once. I answered. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was learning to be. He asked if I still loved him. I told him that's not the question that matters right now. What matters, I told him, is whether I still love the version of myself I become when I'm around him. He didn't have an answer. Some nights, the loneliness is loud. I won't lie to you. There are moments when I miss the illusion more than the reality. When I crave the familiar ache of trying to earn their love because, at least then, I had a purpose. A role. A script to follow. But then I remember. I remember the table in that photo. 12 seats. 12 smiles. No space for me. I remember my father's voice. They didn't want you there. I remember the way Thomas averted his eyes when I asked if he knew. And I remember how I felt when I walked through Lisbon with no one to answer to and no one to perform for. I remember how light I felt. How still. How entirely my own. They thought I would break when they left me out. What they didn't realize is that I had already broken. And I had already rebuilt. Now, when I open my bank app, the numbers don't fill me with guilt or obligation. They feel like possibility. Like the foundation of something that is finally mine. I don't know what comes next. I don't have a 5-year plan or a perfect ending to this chapter. But I do know this. I am no longer the scaffolding. I am the structure. And from here on out, the only thing I fund is my own future. It had been almost 6 months since I stopped feeding the machine. That's what I'd started calling it in therapy, the machine. This invisible but insatiable thing I'd spent a decade of my life keeping alive. My family's needs, their crises, their expectations, the unpaid therapy calls, the rent wiring at midnight, the check-ins I sent that no one returned. But when I unplugged from it, when I stopped pumping my love into something that only knew how to take, it didn't just sputter and fade. It turned on itself. My siblings fought over scraps. My father's passive-aggressive emails started morphing into direct, clipped demands. My mother's calls became infrequent but loaded, as if each ring was a silent scream that said, "We didn't think you'd actually stop." The more I stayed silent, the louder their noise became. But I had learned to listen differently now. Not to their noise, but to mine. I'd started investing that $10,000 a month into something that actually made me breathe differently. Not luxuries, not revenge, not some dramatic announcement, but into something I had once wished existed for me. A small but powerful thing, something that started as an idea, a sketch on a napkin during my Lisbon trip, after I passed by a community mural wall filled with letters from children to their future selves. I remember standing there, reading one in particular. A child named Sophia had written, "I want a place where I can cry and draw and not get laughed at." And something inside me, something long buried under spreadsheets and credit transfers and guilt, shuddered awake. When I returned home, I wrote a business plan. Quietly, methodically, with the same precision I once used to comb through quarterly projections and estate planning tax loopholes. I named it the Harbor, a youth center, but more than that, a place for forgotten kids, quiet kids, burdened kids. Kids who felt like scaffolding. Kids who knew too well what it meant to feel unseen. With the help of a local foundation, I acquired an old municipal building near the harbor, its windows cracked and its roof begging for new life. I brought in the best contractors I could find. Paid them fairly. Hired artists and musicians and counselors and former educators, People who knew what it meant to hold space, not just give answers. I didn't put my name on anything. No press release. No ribbon-cutting ceremony where I had to pretend I cared about donors more than I cared about the kids. I just signed the checks and opened the doors. And they came. They came with backpacks too heavy for their frames and eyes that darted like they were waiting to be reprimanded. They came quiet. Then they came louder. They filled the hallways with sound and art and questions and healing. We had music nights and poetry readings and budgeting classes for teenagers who'd already been taught to live without. We offered housing assistance to 18-year-olds aging out of the system and grief groups for kids who had lost people no one ever talked about. We partnered with therapists and creative mentors. We created spaces where silence wasn't punished, but welcomed, explored. I never told anyone how it was funded. No one asked. The staff thought I was just the administrator, the one who signed the schedules and waved politely at pickup and drop-off. I liked it that way. Until one afternoon, mid-October, when I saw a familiar name on the application list for our Emerging Voices Fellowship, a program I'd created to help under-resourced teens build portfolios in writing, art, and film. Caleb Montgomery, my youngest brother, the baby of the family, the one I had still been sending birthday cards to even when I stopped responding to the rest. The one who used to follow me around when we were kids, holding my hand with that sticky grip only 5-year-olds seem capable of, whispering secrets about bugs and superheroes. The one who'd grown into a teenager I barely knew, a boy hardened by the same family culture I'd fled. The application was raw. That surprised me. He wrote about feeling lost after high school, about applying to colleges and getting rejected, mostly because he had missed deadlines, not because he wasn't smart enough. He wrote about feeling like a ghost in his own house. He wrote about drawing at night, in secret, and dreaming about making graphic novels, but never telling anyone because dreams were too expensive in our family. He didn't mention me. Not once. But he did mention the harbor as if it were a myth. I heard about this place, he wrote. People say it's for kids who don't feel like they belong anywhere. I think that's me. I sat with that application for a long time. Longer than I meant to. I thought about forwarding it to the program director and letting it go through the usual channels. I thought about remaining invisible, the way I had trained myself to be. But then I thought about what it meant that he applied at all. What it cost him, even if he didn't know I was behind it. And I scheduled an interview. In person. Not out of cruelty, but because sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to let it be seen in the light. He arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big and jeans that had definitely seen better days. His shoes were scuffed, and he carried a sketchbook under his arm like it was armor. When he saw me walk into the conference room, his body stiffened like a trap had been sprung. He didn't say anything, neither did I. I sat down across from him and opened his file slowly. Gave him time to speak if he wanted to. He didn't. So I did. I saw your application, I said, my voice steady but not cold. I wanted to ask you something. He nodded cautiously, eyes wary but curious. I slid the sketchbook closer to him, gently. When you filled this out, were you afraid you might not be chosen? He hesitated. Then, in a small voice, he said, yeah, a little. I nodded. Good, I said. Then I stood. Slowly, deliberately. He looked confused. Hurt, maybe. But before I walked out the door, I looked at him, not through him, not around him, but at him, and I said, now you see what it feels like to ask for something, and not be sure if you're wanted. Then I left. I didn't wait for a reaction. I didn't linger to see how he processed it, because that moment wasn't about shame or revenge. It was about truth. The kind you speak once and let echo. The next morning, I walked into the office early. The sun hadn't even reached the windows yet. The halls were silent in that pre-day way I loved, when the world still felt like a promise. On my desk was an envelope. Inside was a note. Handwritten. Slanted. Rushed. Definitely his. I didn't know you made this place. I didn't know you were still looking out for us. I'm sorry. I don't think anyone else is going to say it, so I will. I'm sorry we forgot you were a person. There was no signature. Just a torn corner from one of his sketches, an unfinished figure of a girl, standing at the edge of something vast, the wind pulling at her hair. Alone, but not fragile. I didn't cry, but I sat there a long time. In therapy that week, Simone asked how it felt to have Caleb show up like that. I told her I wasn't sure. That it was like holding a photograph of a place you'd once lived in, familiar but too far gone to return to. I told her I wasn't sure if forgiveness was the goal anymore. She smiled, nodded. Maybe forgiveness isn't the door, she said. Maybe it's the window. Maybe you don't have to walk back in. Maybe you just let some light through. That stuck with me. Because the truth is, I don't want my family back. Not as they were. But I do want to see what happens when the next generation of Montgomerys and Robertsons and whatevers grows up with more options than sacrifice and survival. So I kept going. I expanded the harbor, opened a second branch on the east side, launched a pilot program for single moms trying to finish school, created a fund for kids who didn't want college but wanted trades or businesses or gardens. Caleb joined the Media Lab and started mentoring younger students in digital storytelling. He never told anyone I was his sister. I never asked him to. Months later, during our end-of-year art exhibit, I stood in a quiet corner of the main gallery while guests moved around with their glasses of sparkling cider and soft gasps of awe. One of Caleb's pieces had been selected for the cover of the printed catalog. A panel from his graphic novel in progress, one he hadn't even let our lead artist see until the night before print. The title? The Girl Who Outgrew the House. I stared at it for a long time, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not because he understood me, but because he had tried. It was almost poetic in a way I never could have planned. The moment it all came full circle wasn't in a courtroom or during one of those hollow family reconciliations they love to show in movies. There was no tearful apology or breakthrough hug where someone finally whispered, "I'm sorry for not seeing you." No. It happened in a ballroom flooded with light, high ceilings, velvet curtains, glasses clinking in the distance, and my name being called over the mic like a melody I'd waited years to hear sung aloud. I didn't know the cameras would catch the exact second I exhaled. Not because I was nervous, but because standing there, in heels that didn't blister and a dress that didn't apologize, I realized the truth I had been circling for years. I had finally outgrown them. And for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink to fit their silence. The applause thundered around me like ocean waves breaking loose after a long, stifling storm. The kind that doesn't ask permission before it rolls in. The kind that makes you remember your body is more than a tool for other people's comfort. They called it the Integrity in Action Award. A plaque, some checks, a few photos for the press. But to me, it was more than that. It was evidence. Proof that what I built mattered to people who weren't trying to trap me in guilt. The speech was short. Intentionally so. I had written every word myself, alone at my kitchen counter the week before, my tea going cold and my heart so strangely calm. I began the same way I'll begin this retelling. I spent years believing my worth was what I gave away. Now I know it's what I choose to build. Meanwhile, just a few towns away, inside a home that used to feel more like a courtroom than a sanctuary, my entire family sat at their holiday dinner, forks idle, mouths suspended somewhere between disbelief and discomfort. The living room television, one of the last luxury relics they hadn't pawned, glowed with the broadcast. My face was on it. My voice too. But this time, there was no sarcasm. No background commentary from Jennifer about my overachiever complex. No sighs from Alan asking if we could change the channel already. No shifting of plates from my mother as she pretended not to notice me. This time, they watched. They saw the cameras flashing, the way the audience rose to their feet without being asked. They saw the man from the city council introduce me with words like trailblazer and protector of voices. They saw my eyes, steady and bright, not asking for anyone's validation, but still getting all of it. My father sat at the head of the table, just as he always had. But the table looked different now. The wine was cheaper. The chairs didn't match. The chandelier bulbs flickered in defiance of being replaced. The money, the status, the ease, it was all fading like fabric left too long in the sun. And in that flickering light, they saw me not as a provider or a walking bank account or the reliable one who always showed up when someone else dropped the ball, but as a force. And I think that scared them more than losing the money. Because I hadn't just disappeared. I had become undeniable. 6 months earlier, I had met with the nonprofit's legal team and a woman named Corinne, an estate strategist who specialized in asset reallocation and legacy law. I handed her the trust documents, the land deeds, and my newly drafted will. I want it all redirected, I told her. Every penny, every property, every title. She raised an eyebrow, not in judgment, but in quiet surprise. You don't want any residual clause for heirs? No fallback recipient. No, I said. The only heirs I recognize are still in high school and don't know where their next meal is coming from. She nodded, clicked her pen, and got to work. By the end of the month, the harbor became not just my life's work, it became the legal successor to everything I had once thought I was supposed to give to my family. It would receive every parcel of land, every investment return, every old share from the family's commercial accounts that I still had claim to. Not a single dollar would go to the people who once asked me to foot the mortgage while pretending I didn't exist. Jennifer tried to call the morning after the award ceremony. I watched her name light up my phone, that familiar mix of hope and entitlement hovering in every vibrating second. She didn't leave a voicemail. Instead, she texted. Saw the award. You looked good. Just wondering if you still have that contact for the program that helps struggling families. No apology. No congratulations. Just that same casual reach, dressed up as something noble. I didn't respond. Because she already had her answer. It took longer for Alan to reach out. When he did, it came as a 3-sentence email filled with grammatical errors and awkward spacing. He tried to joke about the award, made a snide comment about how he didn't even know people got recognized for charity work anymore, and then asked if I could co-sign a small business loan for a bar he wanted to open with his friend from college. I stared at the blinking cursor for a full minute, and then I typed exactly 3 words. Find another investor. And then I archived the email, forever. The only one who didn't try to ask for anything was Caleb. He came by the harbor 3 days after the ceremony, hands in his pockets, eyes quieter than usual. I saw it, he said, toeing the gravel with the side of his shoe. You looked whole. I smiled. I am, I said. For the first time, I think. He nodded, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. I drew something, he said. It's not finished, but I wanted you to have it first. It was a single-panel comic, a girl, silhouetted, standing in front of a house on fire, not afraid, not running. Just standing still, arms loose at her sides, face calm. And rising behind her, not smoke, but a river. Flowing out, forward, away. She didn't burn it, he said quietly. But she didn't save it either. She let it fall so she could build the river. I swallowed hard. Sometimes, the only acknowledgement you need comes without applause. The press started calling after that. A few magazines. A local documentary team. A national news outlet that wanted to do a segment on philanthropic leadership in underserved communities. They all asked the same questions. What made you start the harbor? How did you manage the shift from private wealth to community-focused legacy? What role did your upbringing play in this journey? And I answered honestly, not dramatically, not vindicatively, but with a calmness that made some reporters blink twice. I come from a family that taught me everything about giving, but nothing about being received. I said in one interview. So I decided to change that for myself and for every child who's ever been asked to hold up a house they were never truly invited to live in. At this point, the old family estate had been sold off. The land parceling had been finalized. The trust no longer bore their names. Jennifer tried to protest legally. She filed a claim citing intentional exclusion. Her lawyer reached out with veiled threats of defamation. But my documents were airtight. Corinne made sure of that. Years of silencing me had left one unintended consequence. They had taught me how to work in shadows too, only now I used that skill for light. And the public didn't care for her sob story. Because by then, the harbor had helped over 600 youth across 3 counties. Because by then, the scholarship fund had covered tuition for 42 young women who aged out of foster care without a cent to their names. Because by then, the name Montgomery meant something entirely different. It didn't represent real estate or inheritance. It represented sanctuary. The last letter I ever received from my father came in spring. It was short. Just 6 lines. You've made your point. I hope it brings you peace. It cost you your family, but I suppose that was your choice. I won't reach out again. Robert. I read it once. Then I folded it in half, placed it in the back of my journal, and wrote below it. It didn't cost me my family. It freed me from pretending I had one. This isn't a story about vengeance. This is a story about vision. About what happens when a woman finally decides to spend her resources on healing instead of harm. About what it looks like when you stop trying to be chosen and choose yourself instead. And for anyone who still wonders how I could walk away from a name, a legacy, a bloodline, I'll say this. They only valued me when the money flowed. Now the faucet's off, and I've built a river elsewhere. Subscribe, because sometimes the best revenge is finally seeing your own worth.